A new survey finds that CNN's major news shows focused on horse race over substance. The column survey of 12 segments was conducted in response to an October 18th segment by CNN's Brianna Keilar, who criticized Sanders' claims that the mainstream media has done an exceptionally poor job covering what is in the reconciliation bill. Let's take a look at that.
Let's take a look at what all he is saying here, because while the media should always be striving to do a better job, it's just not true that the media hasn't covered what is in the bill and doesn't continue to do so. Media outlet after media outlet has covered this, and it's very easy to find online if you want to know about it. And on television, I mean, just looking at CNN, segment after segment about what is in the bill.
According to the survey of the 2 hours and 6 minutes of CNN coverage analyzed, only 10 minutes was dedicated to the substance of the bill. Meanwhile, the Daily Poster reported how, quote, companies are using DC's tip sheet industry to supercharge the corporate media crusade against climate, healthcare, and anti-poverty legislation. Friend of the show, David Sirota, lays this out well, tweeting, Punchbowl News presented by Exxon just demanded people stop criticizing Manchin. Politico, quote, presented by Pharma, just asserted that Dems can't pass healthcare legislation. And Axios, quote, presented by Pharma, lauded cinema as a force to be reckoned with. Host of the Katie Halper Show podcast and co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast, Katie Halper, is here to discuss. Welcome, Katie.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So whenever I turn on CNN, I feel like they're covering, I feel like it's always January 7th. There's some new wrinkle of the Capitol riots to discuss. Yeah. Do you think it's a fair criticism that they're not covering the substance of the bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a fair criticism. I think the fact that Keilar was so defensive and as well as Maggie Haberman, who tweeted out something defensive about how the media is blamed, I think shows kind of the lack of, honestly, professionalism that the media treats this issue with. And you have, this is legacy media, right? These are Maggie Haberman at the New York Times, Brianna Keilar at CNN. And you can't just show a couple of screen grabs of headlines to make your point that the media has been doing a good job at covering the substance of these bills. And in fact, what this really good study done by a survey by Adam Johnson and Gabe Levine-Drizin at the Column, which is a Substack, and Adam is a really great media critic. They look at some of the coverage of this. They focus on, I think, 4 days because they're not CNN. They don't have the resources to go through all of the hours of CNN's coverage. And again, it's kind of telling that Keilar, who worked for CNN, that's the best that she can do. A couple of headlines and showing some screen grabs of coverage of this issue. And they looked at 12 segments of CNN coverage from the final 4 days of September. I'm just quoting from this. Excuse me if I nerd out a little bit, but we chose the final 4 days of September because it was the peak of the public debate on the reconciliation bill, and it occurred before Senator Sanders and other progressives began working the refs on coverage, complaining about the hollowness of the public debate. Thus, we feel it's more representative of the points Sanders was making. And they looked at Jake Tapper, Wolf Blitzer, and Anderson Cooper, and found that the coverage of like the horse race discussion, or which senator swiped at that senator, or is it really going to be able to pass, or how are we going to pay for it, that was really outweighed the actual focus on what was in the bill. And they looked at 2 hours and 6 minutes of total coverage, and only 10 minutes was dedicated to what was actually in the bill versus 1 hour and 55 minutes on horse race issues. So,
I mean,
take that, CNN.
Well, two points on that, though. So September 27th was the date that Josh Gottheimer had won for his vote. And progressives were saying, no, we're not going to let this vote happen. We're gonna hold the line. And so the vote got delayed, and then the big question really was, are they going to have this vote, or is the vote not going to be held? So, however, I do think that you could pick a different 4 days, and I think you'd get the same result that they came up with, even if CNN could defend covering process in that process heavy time. So, Katie, like, what would a world look like?
But it's interesting that they don't cover. I mean, maybe they haven't been presented probably with the results of the survey, but it is interesting that they don't justify. Oh, well, we had to focus on these things. You know what I mean? I'm
right,
sure.
But let's think about what a world would look like in which the actual substance of the bill would be debated. Like, I don't think this is something that we need to study to even understand. Like, imagine if there was a cable news network that would have somebody on to defend the child tax credit and somebody on to argue for work requirements.
Maybe it wouldn't have any viewers. Maybe they don't do it because people wouldn't watch. I mean, right? That's what's at the root of this question, probably.
Right. So, Katie,
or because who their advertisers are. Going back to the Sirota tweet, but.
Right.
Sorry, I cut you off, Ryan.
No, media that is funded publicly, like say the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation or whatever, when they don't have to worry about funding, they do a lot more, substantive policy-based coverage.
Right.
We don't know what the ratings would be of CNN if they were doing that instead. Hard to see them doing much worse than they're doing now. But what do you think a world would look like that where actual substance was getting debated in a way where you tried to make it entertaining?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's inherently boring to go for substance, especially if you do it in a way, as you just suggested, Ryan, which is a debate. I think people would be interested in that. I think that there's, hearing the same question after question, but will it pass? But who will pay for it? But what are American voters thinking about it? Well, they're not thinking about it in the way that they could be if they were, given a responsible media instead of an irresponsible one. And I do think, as you pointed out, it's not like their ratings are great anyway, so maybe they want to try something different. But it's true. We know that these policies and programs that are in the bill are extremely popular. And we also know that most, a lot of people don't know what's in the bill. And, Al Franken actually had an interesting comment saying that they should be, instead of calling it the reconciliation bill, they should be calling it by names of the things that are actually in it. Which I think is true. Like, the Dems could definitely do a better job messaging around this.
But because they have to jam everything into this one bill, you'd have to say, let's talk about the child tax credit, climate, community college. We're just getting, and that's just getting started.
What about saving Americans? Or something?
Yeah, and then you call it the Build Back Better, and you feel cringe even just saying Build Back Better.
Where's the Frank Luntz of the left? That's what we need.
I do always have to point out, though, I am relentlessly critical of CNN. I criticize them on our show. I criticize the media when I'm tweeting about it, in articles I write for Reason, where my normal gig is. Despite all of that, they invite me on to CNN on Brian Stelter's show. I've been on a number of times. So I do always want to point out that despite me being very vocally critical of their coverage, they are willing to have me share my perspective on their network, which is, I think, an increasingly rare thing in our media environment. So I have to tip my hat to them for that.
But to be fair, you're not totally outside of the parameters, I think, that they allow on CNN. Like, you're not someone.
Go ahead, you can insult me. I'm not gonna. I'm just kidding.
No, it's not even an insult.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't. Someone who I'm trying to think of someone who they could actually have on who would. I mean, okay, just to quote this piece again, they say there were no personal interest stories on seniors unable to afford. Not that you should be swapped out for this stuff, but anyway, there were no personal interest stories on seniors unable to afford dental care or hearing aids. No profiles of poor mothers explaining how much they from having childcare for 3- and 4-year-olds, no interviews with poor teenagers on what free community college would mean to them, no detailed analysis of what will happen if the federal government doesn't begin to meaningfully tackle climate change, nor any discussions or debates about the potential price tag, this is important, of not tackling climate change, estimated to be about $23 trillion globally by 2050. So, I mean, they don't have anyone on the show who would make those points, right? I mean, not only do they not have the voices of these people, but they certainly don't have people coming on to challenge, for instance, one of the big premises. And I mean, no, you wouldn't do that, Robbie, and that's not your lane.
Just because we were kind of saying they seem thin, and in some ways they do seem thin-skinned about their coverage.
Okay,
and here's someone who is criticizing their coverage that they are giving a platform to.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you're just so charming; they have no choice. They can't help but book you.
Okay. Now that we've given that last
Katie,
word,
thank you so much.
Thank you personally, Katie.
We found our clip.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Stick with us. We'll have more Rising, probably less flattering to me, more Rising after this thing. Stay with us.
And you too, Ryan. They should have you on all the time.